Martha lifted the damp blanket and found the bed beneath empty, the rope frame sagging where a child should have slept, and a small lead company token tucked beneath the pillow. Suspicion tightened Martha's hands as she pressed the token between her thumb and forefinger and stared at the stamped mark. She turned the token so the stamp caught the weak lantern light. The attic smelled of wet wool and lanolin. Her fingers left a dark smudge on the metal. She did not call for help. She folded the blanket back with careful, steady motions and listened. A slow breath came from the next mattress. Someone shuffled blankets. She hooked the token into the corner of her apron and climbed down the ladder to the dim corridor below. Martha Hargraves kept no finer things. Her leather apron hung oil, dark at the waist. A threadbare wool cap hid hair that had been pinned back since she was a girl. She kept 2 children's names in her head and a rent balance at the back of it, the same way she kept a list of stitches in a damaged seam. Her life centered on the mill and the tenement. Dawn to dusk work, a hearth that barely warmed their kitchen, and rope beds in the attic when money ran thin. The immediate problem stood in the corridor, a missing child and a token that meant payment had been made. If the token belonged to the company, then someone had been given permission, formally or informally, to remove a child. That single fact made the stakes clear. Families paid to reserve rope spaces. A paid space should have a sleeping person inside it. She caught Tom Rudd by the shutter. He was closing fasteners with hands already grey from starch and humidity. "Tom," she said, "there's a bed empty upstairs." "Where's little Isaac?" Tom's jaw tightened. He did not meet her eye. "Isaac," he said, "I thought." "You thought what, Martha?" Tom fumbled for words. "I thought the family would come back tonight. They'd be gone a fortnight." Martha put the token on the shutter sill where Tom could not miss it. "This was under a pillow," she said. "This is a company mark." She kept her voice low but sharp. Tom's shoulders dropped. "We keep records," he said, but his hands found the shutter latch again. "I signed nothing." "Then who signed?" she asked. Tom's gaze skirted the corridor, then landed on the mill door. People pay for rope beds, Martha. The foreman keeps the list. If a space is paid for, a man comes for the token sometimes. I don't know the rest." Her suspicion shifted into a flat, determined curiosity. If the mill took money to hold a bed, who decided that a child could be moved? Who collected the token later and why? Martha's attention moved from the token to the way Tom tucked his chin. He avoided saying the name of the master. She left the corridor and crossed to the kitchen hearth, where Ellen stirred a thin porridge. Ellen's hands were small and stained with flax. The kitchen smelled of peat smoke and boiled cabbage. 2 children sat on a low stool, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Ellen," Martha, holding up the token, "did your family pay for a rope?" Ellen glanced at the token, then at the children, then back at Martha. "We paid 3 weeks ago," she said, "for the corner bed." "Why?" Martha set the token on the table. "There's an empty mattress upstairs, and this was found beneath the pillow." She watched Ellen's face tighten. Ellen reached into her apron and produced a small, stained scrap of cloth, folded until it showed only the mill's stitch mark. "We use this to claim a bed when we cannot be here at night, Ellen. I keep it hidden." "Who else would have this?" They compared notes. Ellen's voice fell into businesslike sentences. "We give the token to the foreman when we cannot stay the night. He keeps the list." "I thought it was a convenience." Martha's mind shifted again. Doubt became a clearer fear. Someone in authority might be arranging removals, and the token was how they marked consent. She tightened her grip on the chair as if to steady the thought. A clatter from the work floor interrupted them. Looms had settled into their early morning rhythm. The room below the kitchen exhaled a steady mechanical hum and a smell of oil. Martha took her shawl and moved down. On the work floor, an apprentice named Jack hurried past, with a small wrapped bundle, glancing at the servant's stare as though the stare itself might swallow him. Martha stopped him with a hand to his arm. "Jack," she said, "what is that?" Jack's face flushed. "Nothing," he muttered. Just rags. Martha held his gaze, then put them down here. Now he hesitated, then set the bundle on a bench. He had soot on his sleeves and a thin, nervous manner of speech. I saw someone by the canal last night, he blurted, a cloaked man. He moved between cellar and canal. He had coins. He had a token. Martha short questions. What did he do? Where did he go? Jack rubbed his thumb along a seam. He met a man by the lock. He handed over something. The man walked off toward the vendor houses. I thought it was wrong. I took the bundle to the stair because I was afraid. He swallowed. I thought I should not tell. Martha named what she now feared aloud. Master Fletcher. Jack flinched. I cannot say. He hires and he pays men. He keeps orders. People listen when he speaks. His voice dropped. Martha's suspicion hardened into something like anger. She could feel it in the set of her shoulders and the quickness of her steps. The mill's leadership had access to the lists and the tokens. If a man like Fletcher handed a token to a cloaked buyer at the canal, this was not accidental. They followed what little trail there was. Ellen came along carrying a small lantern. Jack led them through service alleys where the bricks still held overnight moisture, and where the canal reflected slivers of pale sky. Soot streaked the mill walls. The air carried the faint odor of fish and coal. Near a narrow quay they saw a figure step from a shadow. Master Fletcher. His coat was darker than the night. He spoke in low tones to a cloaked man, then dropped a coin pouch into the other's palm and passed something small across the exchange. The cloaked man lifted it under the lantern light. A token. Ellen made a sound. Martha's hands tightened on the lantern handle. She kept close to the wall and watched Fletcher nod once and leave toward the mill yard, walking with the certainty of a man who made others move for him. Martha. Ellen whispered. He gave the token. Martha forced her breathing steady and moved. A part of her wanted to call out, to seize Fletcher in the moment. She did not. She watched his gait, the way he kept his shoulders square, and she followed at a distance. When Fletcher turned into a narrow service entrance, he did not notice the woman who emerged from a doorway there. A child clung to the woman's wrist. The child's face was pale and streaked with soot. The woman met Fletcher so quickly that the movement looked practiced. Fletcher handed over a small slip of cloth, then walked away. Martha's thoughts pivoted. Where the token had meant permission, this slip of cloth meant trade. She saw the exchange for what it was. Not a repayment to the family, not a temporary transfer of sleeping rights, but a handoff. She moved forward. At the attic hatch, the door was locked. Martha found a loose nail in the stairwell and eased the latch. The rope room smelled of damp wool and hot bodies that had cooled in the night. A few lamps burned low. Inside, she watched a small trade unfold. Workers clustered around a narrow space, voices folded into low tones. A cloaked buyer, a man whose face was kept in shadow, handed over a cloth, wrapped bundle and left, with 2 coins clinking together. A child lay beneath a blanket, protesting weakly. A woman tore the blanket back, revealed the child's face, and passed him with trembling hands to the cloaked man. Martha stepped forward and spoke with a voice that did not tremble. Stop. Her hand touched the edge of the blanket. Hands reached for her. A man muttered, "This business." "Who gave you the right?" she demanded. Her voice made others still. The cloaked man hesitated. The woman who had passed the child kept her head bent. Ellen moved beside Martha and lifted her chin, though her voice was small. "Ellen." "Martha, who are you working for?" Ellen swallowed. "They say they're retaking children to workhouses in the south. They promise money to mothers who do not have coin. I do not like it. I only need to feed my 2. A worker named Simon stepped forward. "We keep our heads down, Martha. We take the scrap when it comes. We owe wages. We take care of our own." Martha's questions came faster. "Who gave the scrap? Who keeps the list? Who takes the tokens?" Tom's voice, when it answered, cut across the cluster. He had followed quietly and stood in the hatch light. "The master's men arranged some payments when orders were slow," he said. "They would be temporary." They would place the children with families that could feed them. I signed for a ledger slip. We did not know. The cloaked man pulled back his hood. It was not a stranger. It was a supervisor from the spinning room, and his face showed the same hard lines as the mill manager's. He spoke thinly. "You don't understand the ledger, Martha. We cannot keep every child here. The company pays a fee when it cannot house a family. It is accounting." Martha's disbelief shifted into a sharper, heavier feeling, betrayal. She could taste it as a metallic tang in her mouth. The ledger was a tool, the token a tiny stamp of permission. The exchange by the canal was the mechanism that made the ledger a living decision. Master Fletcher's name came again and again. The argument rose in quick lines. "Martha, Master Fletcher handed tokens by the canal tom. I only recorded the slipped Ellen. We were paid a small coin. We thought it would help Simon. We had to." Orders were low. There were 5 short exchanges, voices clipped and fast. "Martha, listen," Tom urged. "If you make a scene, they'll close the mill. Families will starve, Tom. We are closing mouths now by sending children away, Martha. We cannot feed them otherwise," Tom replied. "Then change the ledger," Martha shot back. "Change the ledger." Tom's hands went to his head. "Who do you think will sign away wages?" A scuffle broke out when the cloaked man tried to pull the child toward the hatch. Ellen grabbed the child's wrist. Martha stepped between them, pressing her body close to the child's, her hands steady, her jaw set. "Don't take him," she said. "Name this man and his orders." Her voice did not shout, but it held weight. For a heartbeat, a tense silence fell. Voices dropped. One of the workers, a woman named Agnes, moved to close the attic door. The cloaked man cursed and reached for his purse. Ellen pushed a scrap of the miller's stitch-marked cloth into the cloaked man's hand and shoved him back. "You promised the foreman you would not take our people again," she said. "You promised me." The cloaked man spat. "Promises do not feed looms." Orders feed looms. At that, Martha did what her fear and anger had been preparing her to do. She hooked the cloaked man's sleeve with her hand and pulled. The cloth bundle tumbled. The child cried out and clung to Martha's neck. Hands grabbed at Martha. Someone struck at her shoulder. She felt her shawl slide. She kept a hold on the child and the cloak and spoke a name. "Master Fletcher," she said, addressing the room. "What right did he have to sign away this child?" Silence pressed in. Then a man from the back, a laborer who rarely spoke, said plainly, "Fletcher signs what the company needs. He signs men away when he is told to. He signs children when he is paid." That claim rearranged everything. It was not only local men making choices. It was an intersection. Company orders, Fletcher's hand, the canal buyer's purse. Martha's mind moved fast. She set the child down into Ellen's arms and stepped back. Her voice changed. She knew the law would not help them at once. She also knew a public accusation could close the mill and leave all families worse off. She had to choose a path that would save the children without bringing ruin to everyone. She settled for gathering proof. She had seen Fletcher hand a token at the canal. She had the attic trade witnessed by several people. She had the scrap of stitch, marked cloth used as a ledger claim. Those were things she could show. Outside, the mill bell rang for the midday pause. Machines creaked and settled, and men and women moved through the yard with oil, dark faces. Martha gathered Ellen, Jack, Tom, and the laborer who had named Fletcher. They spoke in quick sentences, names repeated so everyone was clear who would do what. "Jack, Martha, you will watch the canal tonight." "Tell no one, I will watch," Jack replied. His voice was thin but steady. "Ellen, keep the scraps safe and make a copy of the stitch mark." "Martha, I will." "Ellen, Tom, we need your ledger entries for last month. Give them to me tonight when the master's men are in the counting room." Martha looked him straight in the eye. Tom hesitated, then nodded once. "I will bring them." They arranged a time. The bell's second toll after dusk. They spread out small tasks. Each person left with something they carried physically. A scrap, a ledger page, a promise to stand watch. Those were their instruments. Before they parted, Martha returned to the attic alone for a moment. The room smelled of wool and sweat and the thin, clean soap they used for children's clothes. She moved along the rows of rope beds, checking knots and seeing marks on linen where names had once been stitched. She found a small wooden cradle pushed under a beam and rested a palm on its rough edge. Her feelings shifted again, from anger to a practical calm. She could see what needed doing. She would not shout. She would gather proof and expose the mechanism that allowed a child to be passed like an accounting entry. Her hands were steady now when she tied a spare rope knot that might, later, hold a covenant among neighbors. Outside, the sun lowered toward late evening. Families drifted back to the yard. A few children came running, and Martha saw one small face she did not recognize. She made a quick mental note of rooms to visit. Then she climbed down the ladder and walked toward the kitchen where neighbors were already gathering to share a thin stew. They sat close around the table. Conversation moved in short, practical lines. Who would keep watch? Who could hide ledger pages? Who would meet Jack near the canal? Ellen repeated names. Tom promised silence. The laborer who had named Fletcher, whose name was Reuben, offered a steady hand on Martha's shoulder. Reuben, Martha, you saw Fletcher handle the exchange. Reuben nodded. I did. I saw him at the quay. He had coins and a cloth. I thought it was payments for hired men. I didn't want to get involved. You will speak, then, Martha. Reuben swallowed the stew and looked at each face. I will speak to the magistrate if you gather proof. I will take the ledger to him if you bring it. Martha felt something like relief, but she did not let it soften her voice. We move tonight, she said. We gather evidence and we stand ready to show it. They planned quietly, and each plan was an action. They agreed to meet at the yard gate when the bell rang thrice after dusk. If they succeeded in pulling ledger pages and showing canal exchanges, they would present the proof to the magistrate. If the magistrate refused, they would take the ledger to the printer and lay it before the community. As they parted, a child at the hearth stood up, rubbing a sleepy eye. He held a small toy carved from a scrap of wood and walked over to Martha. He put the toy into her palm without looking up. For luck, he said. Martha folded the toy into her apron pocket. She felt the weight of the token there too. She had turned suspicion into a plan that night. She would not let the betrayal stand. The clock at the yard swung toward dusk. Martha stepped outside to tie her shawl more tightly and check her lantern. She paused when there was a soft knock at the kitchen door, 3 short knocks that she knew meant someone had come with news. She moved to open it. Mid-shift, Mr. Copley snatched Martha from her loom and slammed a lead token onto the bench between them. Suspicion tightened Martha's fingers around the shuttle. She stared at the stamped edge and felt the room tilt into accusation. Where did this come from? Mr. Copley, where did you hide company property? Martha had not expected the morning to break on threat. She blinked thread, dry eyes, and touched the token with a thumb that still smelled of flax and oil. The token matched the one she'd found beneath the damp blanket in the rope room the week before. The same stamped mark she'd pressed between thumb and forefinger when no child answered, where a child should have slept. That earlier discovery had been a small, terrible fact. Now it was an accusation aimed at every household whose bed hung from ropes. She opened her mouth. Her voice came soft and even. I found it in my rope room, Copley, she the name to anchor the claim. Mr. Copley pushed the token toward Caleb, a boy at the next loom. Caleb looked up, his hands still looping thread. Caleb, look at this, Mr. Copley, and the mill floor watched. Voices thinned to the hum of machinery and the small rustle of breath. Through the first sentences, the central problem was clear. A token found in a worker's room had become proof in the overseer's hands that households were stealing company time or property. That accusation threatened shelter and rations. Martha knew the stakes immediately. If the company cut rations or evicted families, a stove would go cold in many rooms. Close mouths would grow keener at night. Suspicion pushed her to act. Suspicion guided each choice she made that day. Mr. Copley paced. Tokens don't turn up by chance, he said. Someone's taking ours or keeping company property. We'll have no loitering with tokens. He looked at the group of women and men gathered by the looms. Names will go to the ledger. His tone left no room for questions. Annie Marsh stepped forward. She kept her voice low, but it reached Martha. Martha, Annie hissed, be careful. They have eyes everywhere. Annie's words carried history. She had lived 3 doors down and traded bread for toggles in darker winters. The exchange was a whispered warning, an early, small event that insisted on caution. Martha felt the room tilt again, this time toward fear. The second emotion, root, took shape in her body as a tightening at the base of her throat and a quickening in her hands. She swallowed and moved to gather her shuttle. We didn't steal, she said. Tell me who was near my room. The phrase was both a demand and an attempt to keep the argument in the open. Her voice held, but her fingers trembled. A mid-morning break pulled workers into the yard. The sun had not warmed much, and the brick kept cold. Annie seized Martha's sleeve and spoke in a clipped rush. Tokens have shown up in odd places. Annie, not just rope rooms. In shoes, on shelves, soon into shawls. Families who ask have trouble. Mr. Ridley has been coming around asking questions. Annie's cadence rushed. She used names to keep the warning concrete. Martha folded the token into the palm of her hand and felt the dent where time had pressed it. Who keeps the children? Caleb, approaching with the cautious air of a young man who still measured risk. Do you think folks sell them? The name Martha recognized and waited for the answer. The corridor beneath the mill carried a different hush. Dust lay in shafts of weak light, and the smell of oil and packed cloth gathered in corners. Martha moved through the service corridor with Caleb at her shoulder. They walked close to the stone, where damp showed in a darker stripe. Caleb pointed with a toe. Look there, he said. Small, damp footprints led into a narrow gap behind a beam. A torn scrap of faded linen, the edge frayed, caught on a nail. They bent. The cloth scrap had the same weave as the piece Martha had seen in the rope room. Her pulse changed, suspicion widened into concern. She ran a thumb along the frayed edge and found a child's suit on the threads. This was hurried. Caleb, someone left in a rush. His words were direct. The discovery functioned as new evidence. Outside, Mr. Ridley arrived at noon in a carriage that left oil tracks and a smell of horse. He carried a ledger under his arm and held a thin smile. The office filled with the scent of ink and pressed paper. In the cramped overseer's room, ledgers stacked like small walls. Ridley flipped pages and named numbers, ration reductions. He said, we cannot afford slack hours. He spoke like a man tallying wood. Mr. Copley watched Martha as if he measured her by the ledger. The tokens matter, Mr. Copley. If tokens vanish, production drops. We will make cuts where needed. Ridley's hand tapped the ledger. Evictions follow default. Shelter comes with labor. The threat was not a rumor. It was a ledger entry and a knock at the door away from action. Martha felt the heat of shame and the sharper taste of urgency. Shame tightened her jaw. Urgency made her step closer. She did not argue with ledger numbers. Instead, she asked, who found the token in my room? She used direct speech to force detail. Meta. Copley shrugged with practiced indifference. A foreman found it, then word spread. He leaned back and looked at her shawl. By late morning, talk had spread among households. Women traded glances while children clipped thread. Mr. Ridley moved through the yards with an even step. Annie pulled Martha aside at dusk and unpinned a corner of a worn shawl. Look, Annie, handing over a sewn patch. Inside, the same faded scrap of fabric was stitched as if hidden. Some families trade tokens, Annie whispered. Some hand over children to contractors who take them on roads for work. It keeps a stove for a while. Her words fell like small stones, a revelation that reframed earlier assumptions. Martha's suspicion shifted. The first suspicion of petty theft became the sickening realization of a darker arrangement. Her hands tightened around the shawl. Who pays the contractors? Martha. Annie shrugged with a slow, bitter motion. They don't pay much. They take what they need, sometimes children, sometimes time. People barter bread for warmth. Annie's voice broke on the last sentence. That evening under the back stair, Annie pulled Martha close and spoke plainly. We hide things, Annie. We stitch tokens into hems. Some of us give tokens away to save a fire for a night. Annie's confession was concrete and small. A cloth scrap, a stitch, a bargain made by hands that counted coal as currency. Caleb listened nearby, jaw tight. Do they come at night? Caleb. His voice was short. He had seen little beyond the mill, but had learned that shadows behind gates often meant trouble. Annie shook her head. Not always. Contractors move like tradesmen. They take numbers, names, and sometimes small feet that leave prints like these. She matched her words to the scrap in Martha's palm. The next event pushed the story forward. Martha followed a shadow into the loft at late evening. The loft smelled of old cloth, of moth, laced wool, and the faint metallic tang of rope. She climbed a ladder and found a narrow gap between stored bolts of cloth. There, tucked under a bundle, a child's wooden shoe sat on its side. Beside it lay a second lead token, half buried in dust. Martha froze. The discovery was specific and immediate. A child's shoe, a token, a seam of dust that had been disturbed. She put a finger to her lips and turned. From the shadows stepped the man who had been collecting tokens, Mr. Ridley. He closed the ladder behind him with a soft thud. You shouldn't be here, Martha. He smiled without warmth. Martha's fear moved into direct action. She set her jaw and lifted the shoe so Mr. Ridley could see it. This belongs to a child on these streets, she said. Where did you get it? The loft felt suddenly like a small courtroom. Mere. Ridley's face shifted from bland to guarded. We keep order, he said. Tokens are company property. Children wander. Tokens disappear. We reunite what we can or reassign what we must. He used ledger language to turn human things into numbers. You don't want trouble, Martha. We can make it easier. The phrase suggested bargain and threat. Caleb had followed and stood at the loft entry, his shoulders tight. Ridley, where's the other shoe? Caleb demanded, who took a child from the rope room. The rapid exchange became an interrogation of men who wore official names. The argument moved in short lines. Caleb, quiet, Mert. Ridley, you have no claim here. Caleb, I saw prints, Martha replied. Caleb helped me look. The back and forth kept pace like shuttle and bobbin. Each short sentence pushed the confrontation forward. Mr. Ridley's patience thinned. He reached for the token. You shouldn't hide company things, he said. His hand moved toward his coat. Martha stepped between him and the ledger gesture. You didn't tell anyone these tokens were supposed to vanish, she said. You brought them here. You left a shoe. Who took the child? She used direct questions to name the crime. Ridley faltered. For a moment, his voice came low. Order requires choices, he said. Sometimes children are sent with traveling contractors. Their families consented in writing or in practice. The sentence offered a motive that felt like a ledger entry, but left out faces. The loft confrontation became the chapter's peak. Voices rose. Caleb shouted, We will not hand over our children for bookkeeping. Mr. Copley arrived, breath heavy from the stairs. He tried to take control. Enough, Mr. Copley insisted. This cannot be shouted here. We will bring this to the gate. His short order tried to reset the argument into official channels. Neighbors drew near. Annie pushed through and held up a sliver of cloth. This stitch belonged to my shawl, she said. You me to hide it, and then you took my boy's days. I want him back. Her voice held both accusation and exhaustion. The crowd answered with murmurs that had no poetic name, only concrete anger and the sound of feet on boards. In the pile of voices, a quick twist changed how people understood the earlier token discovery. A man called Thomas Byers, who had worked nights near the dye vats, stepped forward. I saw a carriage 3 weeks ago, he said. Ridley was not alone. He met a contractor who took 2 small bundles down the road. The revelation named a meeting and a carriage. It pulled the ledger's dry numbers into a route and a time. Ridley. Thomas. You met them at dusk by the north gate, Mitt. Ridley hardened. No witness will stop necessary work, he replied. His tone tried to cut the story down to necessity. The crowd would not let it lie. Voices demanded names and times. The argument turned into a local trial. 3 to 5 paragraphs later, another external event arrived. Someone from a neighboring tenement brought forward a folded scrap of ledger paper with a matching stamp. It bore the same mark as the token. The paper had numbers and a scrawled note. Temporary transfer authorized. Ridley reached for it and then closed his hand. The paper had the potential to decode the quiet removals. Confrontation took rapid forms now, short back, and fourth sentences where every line counted. Ridley, did you sign this? Annie, Ridley, did you send them? I acted under orders. Ridley, orders from company accounts. Show the ledger. Martha demanded, show the name. The exchange contained 3 quick demands that forced Ridley to consider exposure. Miss Copley tried to calm neighbors by promising an inquiry, but his promise sounded like delay. I'll post the ledger in the overseer's office tomorrow, he said. We will see names. Caleb pushed forward. Tomorrow means time to hide paper. His short sentence made the crowd murmur louder. Delay was a tactic and suspicion flared into impatience. That night, families gathered at the mill gate beneath lantern light. Some carried scraps, shawl pieces, a child's shoe, a token hidden in an apron. Martha stood with the second token hidden in the cuff of her work dress. She felt the metal warm against her skin. The emotional tone had shifted. Suspicion had become fear and then hardened into resolve. She did not speak much, but her actions navigated the room. The twist unfolded when a woman named Agnes, who kept a corner stall selling patched shirts, stepped forward with a folded letter. This came in a pocket of a coat sold at market. Agnes, it names a contractor and a day. It also names a number that matches these tokens. The letter tied the scattered evidence into a rote. Coat market, contractor. It was a specific, concrete connection that changed the group's approach. Voices rose into argument again. Ridley, explain who signed for transfers at the north gate. Mr. Copley, why did your men not check the coach manifest? They traded short demands. The argument included 3 to 6 back and forth lines and used names to keep accountability clear. The exchange forced active decisions rather than quiet fear. A quieter scene followed the public uproar. In the narrow attic where rope beds hung, Martha and Annie sat with a single lantern. Martha slipped the spare token into her apron and felt its coolness. What will you do? Annie. Her voice held exhaustion and a steady note of practical threat. We will find the ledger entries and names, Martha replied. We will not let them move children from our rooms without proof. Her sentence had a measured pace. It was less a vow than a working plan. The night gave one more surprise. A neighbor at the gate reported that a contractor's apprentice had been seen returning a child's shoe and paying a small sum at a tavern near the river. The return turned the assumption of permanent removal into a possible exchange. Children sent along roads and later returned when a bargain had run out. The detail shifted the moral picture from final loss to alarming commerce. Martha felt the second emotion shift clearly. The fear that had driven her into the loft turned toward a focused anger that pushed her to organize. She spoke little, but her hands moved to check the shawls in her neighbor's laps, to compare stitches, to line up tokens and scraps. The action made the anger useful. She Annie for names. She Caleb to check the gate at dusk. She arranged small tasks that traded talk for motion. Everywhere in the room, people made choices that were concrete. Thomas Byers and Agnes agreed to watch the market ledger. Annie promised to stitch hidden pockets with token marks to catch who passed them. Caleb volunteered to follow the coach route at dusk. Each decision fell into a list of actions, not declarations. Before the chapter's end came the mini cliffhanger. A soft knock sounded at the attic door. Everyone froze. The knock could be a neighbor, a patrol, or someone sent to retrieve a token. Martha tightened her grip on the token in her apron and warned. "Quiet." The short words stopped all speech. The knock repeated, 2 measured taps, then footsteps passed by far below and the sound faded. The moment left a fresh tremor in the group's plans and carried the uneasy knowledge that the company would not wait on ledger pages before acting. At last, the public accusation had been made and plans formed. Families left in small knots, exchanging instructions and hiding scratches of evidence in shawl hems. Martha walked back to her narrow attic room with the rope bed and the dented token in her apron. She lifted the damp blanket, set it back, and pulled the token closer to her palm as if it were a warm coal. The final image of the night was concrete. A lantern guttering at the edge of a narrow bed, a folded scrap, and the sound of boards creaking under hurried feet. She did not end with a speech. Instead, Martha pressed the spare token into the inner pocket of her apron and pushed the attic ladder closed behind her. The sound of the ladder settling was a specific, situational beat that marked a choice made and a burden accepted. In those closing minutes, the chapter's conflicts resolved enough to move forward. The loft discovery had been made public, the company faced accusation, and neighbors began to take organized steps to watch market ledgers, gate routes, and contractor movements. Martha's decision to keep the token and to organize households gave the next scene a clear direction and a new danger to carry into the following chapter. Martha caught the ledger in the lamplight before it hit the floor. She had been moving along the mill corridor at dusk, hands wrapped around her lantern, when Samuel slid the small, worn book toward Mir. Copley and a scrap of paper fell away. The scrap showed a column of names and a cluster of coded marks. Suspicion tightened Martha's hands and her breath shortened into a careful, measured pace. The discovery spelled a clear danger. The tokens and rope beds from the attic and the loft were not isolated accidents, but part of a ledger kept by the company. She did not call out. She pressed herself against the cold plaster and watched Mr. Copley tap the edge of the ledger with a finger, slow and precise. He looked up at Samuel and said, "Keep a neat hand, Samuel." "I want those figures right." Samuel nodded, eyes fixed on the page, then pushed the leather cover closed as if nothing untoward had happened. Martha's next emotion shifted from suspicion to a colder, clearer alarm. The ledger turned her unease into a problem she could name and measure. Martha moved faster, hugging the opposite wall so the lantern light fell away from her skirt. She had left a childless rope frame in the attic the night before. She had found a lead token sewn beneath a pillow. That memory stayed in her hands like a weight she did not yet lift. Now she had evidence that the token, the rope beds, and the tall brick mill's quiet passages were threaded into an accounting that laid claims on people. The immediate question pushed at her. Who else on those lists had seen their names turned into marks? She climbed the attic stairs with the ledger scrap folded flat inside her pocket. The attic smelled of starch and dried peat. Ropes creaked under her weight. She sat at the narrow window and struck a match to read under the lantern glass. The ledger's page that had slipped free was shorthand cramped into columns. Names, small marks, then an abbreviated note. Some entries paired a mother's name with a tiny loop or cross that did not read like currency. Where there should have been wages, there were symbols that suggested children and claims. Martha's hands trembled once, then steadied. Her next shift of feeling ran from alarm into a guarded, deliberate plan. She would not take this ledger to the foreman without proof. She copied the most legible name onto her palm with the soot of the lamp. Etta Mallory, she knew Etta's back alley washhouse, the scrubbed table where Etta beat shirts in a wooden tub. That knowledge turned the ledger from a list into a direct threat to people she could touch. At the washhouse, late that night, Martha kept her voice low as she pushed the scrap across the table. Etta glanced at the narrow paper and then at the basin where a man, Tom, rinsed out a child's small pinafore. The water rolled over Tom's hands in slow circles. "Read it here, Martha," Look for your name and the marks. Etta's fingers found the cramped letters and stilled. Martha. Etta, the single name carrying a sudden, brittle fear. This is my sister's mark. Tom set the pinafore down and said, Name the line, Etta. Speak plainly. Etta pointed with a shaking finger. Their exchange moved from rumor to personal emergency in less than a dozen breaths. The second emotion shift arrived for Martha as she watched the change on Etta's face. Suspicion became dread. Etta pressed her thumb into the paper, then folded it carefully and pushed it back. We cannot go to the magistrate with this without more. They'll laugh it off, or worse, Mr. Copley will make an example. Tom's jaw tightened. Then we follow the cart. We watch the next delivery. We do not bring the ledger in our hands. Reuben's name came up. Reuben, the foreman who had steadied a loom for Martha when her back gave out. He had shown kindness in small ways. They needed one of those old debts now, a plan formed with deliberate, practical actions rather than vows. They chose a doorway near the mill where lantern light fell in a thin rectangle and the stone angled away from the street noise. In that doorway at dusk, Martha handed Etta back the ledger scrap and outlined the steps. We follow the cart by the canal. We keep our distance. Reuben will stand with us if we find something, and he knows the faces at the quayside. Etta nodded, lips pressed together. Reuben came to the doorway, his former sleeves rolled, face shadowed by a cap, and said, If there's a cart that carries what you think it does, I won't let Copley set you up alone. His voice was short. His choice felt like a promise, but also a dangerous crossing of the foreman's duties. They kept their motions small. They timed the company cart by listening for the low rattle of wheels against cobbles and the hollow thump of a wooden crate. The night smelled of canal water and horse sweat. Martha's lantern cast a narrow pool that showed the outlines of crates but not the faces of men who moved like shadows. The cart slowed near the canal bank and two men shifted crates with care. One crate had been tied so tightly the twine strained at the corners. Martha felt her pulse climb and pushed forward with Etta and Reuben, each step deliberate, the group staying in the alley's puddled darkness. They did not expect to find a child's boot wrapped in oilcloth. Reuben handed the lantern over and tightened his grip on the crate's rope. He unfastened a corner, and the oilcloth fell open to reveal a small bundle. Inside, tightly bound, was a child's boot and a folded scrap of wool. Etta made a short, sharp sound between her teeth and said, No. Martha knelt and touched the boot with one finger. The leather was softened and the sole was marked with apparent mending. The boot confirmed what the ledger had implied. Marks in the book did not stand for ledger entries alone. They matched the bodies and belongings of children. When they lifted the crate, the cart's driver caught the movement and shouted. A short scramble followed. Mr. Copley himself had come down to the quayside with a watcher. The scene snapped from quiet to confrontation. Mr. Copley barked, Stop! Who goes there? Reuben stepped forward and called back, We are inspecting a damaged crate. Copley. The watcher reached for the ledger sticking from his coat and held it like a shield. People gathered from the quayside. The canal's surface reflected the lamplight in long strips. Words became sharp and direct. You have no right, mesdames. Copley started. You were seen following company carts, he added, aiming the accusation like a tool. Martha heard the accusation and felt another emotion shift, from resolve into anger tightened by fear. She answered him in a steady voice, We found this in a crate. We thought it was lost property. Lost property. Mr. Copley, you took company property. The watcher moved forward as if to place hands on the crate. Reuben put himself in front of Martha and Etta and said, No hands. There will be no roughness. His tone was flat. He would not let the men grab the evidence without challenge. Etta's confession came out in a rush when the crowd's murmurs turned sharp. She flung out a hand to the watcher and said, I gave them a token. I gave a token to keep my rent from being raised. I traded it for a bit of mercy for my sister. Her voice hit the space without pretense. The crowd took in the detail. For a moment the matter turned inward. Mr. Copley smirked and said, "There you are. Entrusted tokens, missing property. Where did you hide the rest, Etta?" Etta's shoulders went still. She answered, "We hid them where children sleep. We hide them where we can." The last sentence landed like a struck bell. The argument escalated into a quick, ugly physical scramble. The watcher lunged for the ledger. Reuben shoved him back. Martha grabbed the ledger's corner and held it flat to her chest. Samuel, who had been nearby, face pale in the lamplight, stepped forward and said, "Those marks are accounts. They are not for public talk." He sounded younger than his years. "Samuel, tell him what that mark means." Mr. Copley snapped. Samuel hesitated, then said, "A cross by a mother's name means the company holds a child's bond until arrears are settled." The words cleared the air. The ledger was an instrument of coercion. 3 to 6 lines of sharp exchange followed between Mit-R. "Copley and Reuben, you insolent foreman." Copley spat. "Reuben, don't make me call the constable." "Copley, call your constable then." Reuben, stepping closer. "Martha, give me the ledger." Copley ordered. "No, Martha, Martha." Reuben quickly, "Give it to me. We will not let them shame you in front of everyone." The back and forth was quick. Each speaker's name punctuated the lines, so any listener could follow who argued and who defended. In the center of the scuffle, a surprising detail shifted the group's understanding again. Etta, hands shaking, unfolded the small scrap of wool found with the boot and revealed a crude stitch where a lead token had been sewn into the hem. "I sewed it so my sister would not be taken tonight. They wanted the token back yesterday for a Tully sighting." The revelation rearranged blame into an ugly clarity. Tokens were used as collateral, and neighbors traded them to keep children in the rooms they slept in. The twist changed how Martha viewed earlier events. Mr. Copley's accusations were not simple bookkeeping but a system that pushed mothers to trade away their own children's safety. The crowd's mood moved in single, visible breaths. Some workers muttered in outrage. Others looked away, afraid to speak. Tom, who had been silent beside Etta, found his voice and said, "You can accuse Martha of theft, but you keep children in ledgers that read like property lists." His plainness forced Copley to step back for a moment. Mr. Copley recovered composure and said, quietly but with menace, "This is a company matter. You are meddling where you do not belong." He named the ledger and the boot as evidence of theft rather than of coercion. Reuben, seeing the angle, said to Martha, "Hide the ledger. If they take it, they will burn the notes." He handed Martha a scrap of cloth. She wrapped the ledger and tucked it beneath her shawl. They withdrew from the quayside with the edges of the conflict unresolved. The watcher's threat to seize the ledger hung in the air. Back near the mill, at dawn, Martha went into the narrow rope room where children sometimes slept. The rope bed frames threw hard lines across the floor. She placed the ledger beneath a faded blanket and sat on a wooden trunk. Her fingers found a length of thread and a needle. She did not speak as she sewed a new, unofficial token into the margin of a child's blanket. A simple cloth tag with a mother's initial and a knot that could pass for a company piece at a glance. Martha's final emotional shift for the chapter moved from anger back into wary resolve. The act of sewing was small and practical. She threaded the needle and pushed it through wool, tightening the knot until the token lay firm in the fold. Etta sat opposite her and watched without commentary, hands folded around the rim of a tin mug. Reuben stayed in the doorway, his silhouette steady, and said softly, "We watch the next cart. We keep our own record now." The sentence read like a plan and a warning together. The chapter closed not in a speech, but in an action and a decision. Martha hid the ledger under a child's blanket and wrapped the new token where a company hand might glance and pass. Etta pressed the blanket to her chest and whispered, "We will not give them the children for their books." Reuben nodded once. Outside, the mill bells began their slow call for the morning shift. A soft knock sounded at the mill door. Someone came with news, and the three of them rose to answer it together. The ledger's presence remained a danger, but now it was a tool they could use. The group's choices had created both a risk and a shelter. They had exposed a method of control, and they had hidden a countermeasure in a child's blanket. The closing knock provided the concrete event that would lead into the next action. A man at the door asking for a list, a rear guard sent by Copley, or a stranger with a new tolly. The next step would come from that knock, and the decision to open the door would be made not from rhetoric but from the practical, measured choices of Martha, Etta, and Reuben. Mr. Copley slammed the lead token onto the brake bench and demanded, "Where did you hide company property, Martha?" Suspicion tightened Martha's hands before she could answer. She pushed her lantern closer so the token's stamped edge caught the lamplight. The room smelled of wet wool and boiled cabbage. The accusation hung in the rafters, and the shift stopped as bodies turned. Martha's jaw set. She had felt suspicion before, but tonight that suspicion pushed her into motion. She wiped her palms on her oil-stained pinafore and rose from her seat. Around her the workers shifted on the wooden bench, and Samuel's fingers stopped worrying the hem of his coat. "Mere." Copley leaned forward, face pale in the lamp glow. "Martha Hargraves," he said, and the name sounded like an order. "This token was under a blanket in your room." "Explain it." Martha kept her voice low. "I found one under the child's bed last week, sir." "I showed you the token then." Her tone did not plead. It named an action. The room supplied its own evidence. The token, the ledger with a torn scrap, a small boot seen in another hand last week. Memory of the rope bed, the sag where a child should have slept, and the secret token beneath the pillow, sharpened what was at stake. They had not meant for the bench to become a court. Foreman Briggs stood at the back with his coat collar turned up against the damp. Men muttered. A woman 2 seats down set her jaw and looked away. The ledger, Samuel's scrap of paper, sat half-folded on the bench. Samuel pushed it forward with a finger as if offering a wound for inspection. "Look," Samuel, voice thin, "the names are here. Tokens missing. Someone's taking them." He tapped the column with a thumbnail. The lamplight made the ink gleam. "We found discrepancies in the tally. We found tokens tucked away." Martha's second emotion rose in a tightness behind the ribs. Fear. Not the wide panic that made a person seize at doors, but a quick, animal caution. She felt the fear as a tightened throat and a more careful balance in her step. She kept her eyes on the ledger. "Samuel, where did you see these taken?" Samuel's reply was a small, halting thing. "I saw Briggs with a handful once, near the manager's office. I saw him hand them to Copley behind the ledger shelf. I did not say. I shouldn't he have?" Voices rose. "You saw what?" "Briggs took them." "Why, tell us now." That was the first external event after the bench slamming, a concrete accusation aimed outward, not inward. Conversation split like raw wood. Mr. Copley barked again to restore order and to hide the trimmer in his own hands. "Samuel, say it plain." "Where exactly?" he demanded. Samuel swallowed. "In the corridor outside the office. Night. I ducked into a doorway. I saw Briggs pass tokens to you, Mr. Copley." He had notes folded in his palm. A silence hit the rafters like a dropped pail. The workers' faces rearranged into suspicion, then into something heavier, alarm. Martha's mind sharpened. This was not simply theft by a lone woman. This might be a scheme reaching into the foreman's hand. Her suspicion shifted under her skin into a fierce need to know the truth. She left her bench only after Mr. Copley called for calm, and the shift resumed without its usual rhythm. Her lantern bobbed as she walked the corridor toward the spinning rooms. The second external event arrived as she passed the narrow stair to the attic. Samuel caught her sleeve and hissed, "Mart here. Meet me near the loft at dusk. I have something." They moved as if on the same, quiet urgency. Samuel's steps were light, his breath visible in the chill. He kept glancing at the doorway where Foreman Briggs sometimes stood like a shadow. When they reached the loft, he slid a torn scrap across the boards. Inked names stared up. A column of marks showed tokens missing beside familiar family names. Martha leaned over the paper and found a new emotion taking hold, disbelief folding into clarity. The ledger showed entries she recognized, her name, the names of neighbors, the little boot noted weeks before, but the marks did not match the work done. A pattern shaped itself, tokens removed, notes exchanged. It moved from being a possibility to being a ledger of choices. Briggs trades tokens for cash. Samuel, voice low, he pockets them. Copley turns a blind eye because Briggs gives him a cut. I saw them. Martha's first impulse was to pin Samuel with a question, but she stopped herself. Instead, she asked, "What proof do you have?" Samuel tapped his pockets and then his jaw. "I saw the exchange behind the manager's office at night. I did not touch anything. I have nothing but what I say." The third external event came with a soft sound in the stairwell. A pair of boots descending. Martha felt the room narrow and the ledger sink became raw under her fingers. She folded the scrap and tucked it into her apron. "Stay near the mill yard," she told Samuel. "If Briggs goes to the office, watch the doorway. Tell no one else." He nodded and left. Martha climbed the narrow attic where the rope rooms slept under eaves. The attic was a place she used when she needed to think. It kept rope beds, spare blankets, and the memory of the child's empty sleeping place. The air smelled of soot and dried starch. She pulled aside a faded blanket to look under the rafters. The attic offered a revelation as an external event. There, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, was a small bundle of lead tokens. The sight triggered a new wave inside her. Anger, sharp as a cut. Her hands shook as she unfolded the rag. Each token bore the company's stamp. One fell from the scrap and rolled to land against the floorboard with a dull sound. Martha pressed a palm to her chest and breathed in. The anger made her voice flat. "So they hid them here," she said aloud, more to steady herself than to scold anyone. She folded the tokens into her own kerchief and slid them into the pocket, soon into her shawl. Her actions turned private anger into a plan. She would not take them to Mr. Copley and risk being accused again. She would collect proof and show it in a way that could not be denied. She left the attic with the tokens pinned close and felt the next emotion, shift as resolve replacing trembling fear. She met Samuel behind the coach house in the yard. He had been watching the lane as she instructed, his jaw set. "Did you find anything?" he whispered. Martha produced the folded kerchief and slid it across the damp stone. Samuel's eyes widened when he saw the tokens. "Where?" he began, then stopped to lower his voice. "How did these get here?" Martha answered with the specifics of the attic and the blanket. They agreed on a course. Observe, then confront where the evidence would be undeniable. Samuel admitted he could name a night when Briggs and Copley slipped into the corridor with a whisper and handed over small metal discs for folded notes. He had not told because he feared losing his job. The pair became an uneasy alliance. That night they watched the doorway by the manager's office. They crouched low, breath shallow in the cold, and watched shadows move. The fourth external event arrived precisely. Foreman Briggs stepped out of the office clutching a folded scrap the size of a palm. Mr. Copley moved to meet him. The exchange was quick, and Briggs palmed a handful of cold metal as he passed a note. Martha's hands went numb, and a new emotion pressed her chest. Vindication mixed with a delicate dread. She whispered, There was Samuel's moment." He saw it. They followed at a distance as Briggs moved away, and Samuel's voice breathed. "I can bring him down if we place the ledger where everyone will see it. But we need Copley to be forced to answer." Martha's reply was direct. "We do not need to accuse without evidence. We need to make the evidence undeniable. Bring the ledger. We'll place the tokens where they cannot be ignored." They moved toward the lantern, lit mill hall where the shift worked late into the night. The hall smelled of heated wool and iron. Machines kept a steady, low complaint that blurred the edges of voices. At the stair landing, workers gathered out of curiosity as news slipped ahead of them. The climax opening arrived as the fifth external event. A doorway observation where Martha and Samuel watched Briggs and Copley exchanged tokens for folded notes. They crouched just out of sight and watched the foreman's fingers close around a small handful, and Copley pressed crumpled paper into his palm. Martha's breath tightened. The sight made previous doubts concrete. They retreated to the hall with careful steps. Martha set the ledger scrap and the tokens on a bench beneath the lantern. She stood and raised her voice so that it reached the nearest rows. Copley, she said, keeping the tone even, I found tokens in my attic folded in a scrap of cloth. I found this ledger scrap. I saw names with missing tokens. Will you look? Copley came like a man trying to steady a chair. Martha, he said, and for the first time his voice did not hold command. You accuse Briggs and me. These are serious claims. Where is your proof? Martha let the tokens clatter onto the bench and pushed the ledger into the lamplight. Here. The tokens are real. The ledger names are real. Samuel saw an exchange in the corridor. I saw the tokens hidden in the attic. Show your hands. Voices rose immediately and a rapid exchange began, the argument lines snapping back and forth with 3 to 6 quick replies, as required. Briggs. Did you do this? Samuel demanded. Samuel, keep your place. Briggs answered, anger quick as a knife. Foreman. Briggs, did you take tokens? Martha cut in. I keep order here. Briggs, you accuse me in front of the shift. Where did these tokens come from? Briggs, where did you get folded notes? Copley pressed. Briggs' face went hard and then pale. He stepped forward, hands clenched. You can prove it, he said, voice tight. You find proof. His sentence broke as a mill girl near the back held up a token and shouted, this one was taken from my child's bed. That was the external event that pushed the scene into full confrontation. A nearby woman produced a token and named its origin. The crowd shifted. The bench chimed with a sound like falling gravel as more people moved forward. Mr. Copley lunged for the ledger to scoop it up. This is nonsense, he said, but his hand trembled. Samuel stepped between them. Don T touched the ledger. Mr. Copley, let it lie. His voice was steady for the first time that evening. Words became action. Briggs moved as if to strike Samuel. Samuel stepped back and barked. Briggs, stop. A scuffle almost began. 2 men grabbed at Briggs' coat. Martha stepped into the lamplight and threw the ledger and the tokens onto the floor in front of everyone. The tokens rolled and clinked against the boards. Silence followed the clink. Eyes moved from the tokens to Briggs' face, and then to Mr. Copley's mirror. Copley found he had no direct answer for the sight of cold metal stamped with the company's mark spread across the hall. The 6th external event, the public confrontation and reveal, reached its peak. Briggs' shoulders sagged for a heartbeat. He tried to use a quick, practiced defense. People trade things among themselves, he said, a weak attempt to reframe. It's only tokens. They are meaningless if you have payments. Samuel cut him off. You passed them to him for cash. I saw it at the corridor. I will say so in front of anyone who will listen. His words were short. Listeners felt the weight. The rapid back and forth returned in heated bursts. Samuel, you real liar. Briggs spat. Briggs, you were seen by Samuel. Martha replied. Martha, you have no proof beyond what you found. Copley, but we have the tokens and the ledger, sir. A neighbor spoke up. We found our children's tokens turned to strangers. We want the truth. Her voice did not tremble. A handful of workers moved toward Briggs. Others kept their distance, uncertain what would follow. Foreman Briggs tried to gather his authority as if it were a cloak. Copley called for order and then, in a voice small enough that the lantern hummed over it, asked Briggs to explain the folded notes in his hand. The 7th external event came when Briggs, cornered by both tokens and witness, made a small, damaging concession. He muttered that payments had been irregular and that he had taken tokens to settle shortfalls between wages and the men who owed debts. His voice cracked on the last word. I gave them to those who pressed me, sir. I meant to return them. There was a shift among the workers that evening from pure accusation to a bleak sort of comprehension. Some recoiled in shame that their own lack of funds had seeded the theft. Others felt something like relief that the pattern had a face. Martha watched the replies as they changed people's posture, a knotted jaw loosening, hands lowering from fists, heads turning toward one another. When Mr. Copley tried to regain control, Samuel spoke up with a detail that reframed the entire situation. "Briggs did not act alone," he said. "He gave tokens to Mir. Copley in exchange for notes. I saw it. They stood in the corridor and did not look like men doing a clerk's pass. They looked like men sharing money." The words landed like stones tossed into a still pond. Mr. Copley flinched and could not quickly fill the shape of his denial. He admitted, haltingly, that he had taken small sums from tokens on occasion to cover what he called administrative errors. His phrasing fell apart under the ledger and the tokens. The workers demanded names, dates, sums. The ledger supplied some of those answers. The tokens supplied the rest. Briggs attempted to bargain. He offered to return tokens where he could. He named a list of men who had pressured him. One worker shouted that the men who pressured were the same who had bought liquor on credit, and the room answered with bitter laughter. The argument ran in sharp, human lines. Accusation, denial, bargaining, and then a slow, public naming. At one point, a neighbor reminded them of the rope bed, the child's sagging mattress, and the token found beneath the pillow. We hid things to feed our families. We hid tokens because we had to. The tokens are our history of small thefts to keep children from cold. But when foremen take them, it changes the meaning. Her words connected the ledger to the attic and to the rope rooms where families slept. That reminder forced an emotional pivot. Pity toward those who hid tokens for bread and anger toward those who took them for profit. Martha watched faces, marked the change in their eyes. She felt a new emotion, quiet satisfaction, not triumph but the relief of an unspooled knot. Her hands were steady now when she picked up a token and tucked it into the brass safety pin on her shawl. The final small event in the climax was procedural but heavy. Mr. Copley, pushed into a corner, promised an investigation. Foreman Briggs was held by the mill steward until the owner could be informed. Some men wanted immediate punishment, others wanted to keep working. The mill's rhythm, which had paused for accusation, resumed with a different pace. Machines clattered and men spoke in lower tones. After the confrontation, the hall emptied slowly. Martha walked the stair landing and found Samuel waiting by the door. He looked worn and raw but steadier than before. "You did right," he said, and his voice contained both thanks and exhaustion. Martha made a small decision then, an action rather than a speech. She pinned a single token into the brass safety pin on her shawl and slipped it beneath the wool. She would teach neighbors how to hide essentials in plain sight. She decided by tucking small things into ordinary seams and turning them into a slow, shared defense. The plan was practical and quiet. It grew from choices, not from speeches. They walked to the narrow attic where the rope bed waited. The final beat of the chapter arrives here as a closing event. Martha laid the remaining tokens into the pocket of her shawl and sat on the rope bed. Dawn light thinly threaded through a small window. The mill outside began its early machines, and the soft clatter sounded like a heartbeat returning to regular pace. Samuel lingered in the doorway. "Will they be punished?" he asked, voice small. "They will be called to account," Martha replied. She did not promise justice served by the law, only that the theft and the ledger were now public. "We have the ledger and the tokens. Names are out in the open. That changes things for the neighbors." Her words were simple and grounded in action. She thought of the child whose bed had sagged in the rope rooms, of the little boot that had once slipped from a hidden corner, and of the neighbor who had lifted a token and named the child's sleeping place. Those details had carried the case from suspicion to evidence. Martha felt the last emotion shift of the chapter. From suspicion to fear, from fear to resolve, and finally to quiet vindication. Samuel touched the lantern handle as if to pass a lamp between them. "What will you do now?" he asked. Martha ran a thumb along the brass safety pin where the token sat. "I'll teach people how to hide what they must keep, and I will watch the ledger. I will tell the owner what I found. When I will tell the truth." They heard footsteps outside the attic, the start of a new shift of men arriving to work. The day would not suddenly bend to justice, nor would the foreman's fate be fully decided that hour. But names had been spoken. The ledger lay in a place where many had read it. The tokens had been shown. The chapter closed with an exact, concrete action. Martha pressed the single pinned token against her shawl, then rose and walked to the attic ladder to go down and face what would come. The final line is not a speech, it is a movement. She put her lantern in her hand and stepped down into the lamplight of the mill hall, the token warm against the wool, ready to speak when called.